the video lesson recording for what we did Monday, August 17th and Tuesday, August 18th. To get to this poem, if you weren't here, remember that you go to classwork. This is one art. To get to your copy of the poem, you can go here. The video lesson of the annotations is here. And the assignments in response to the poem and annotations is here. This is taking the next step that we did in class where we're discussing the poem and some ideas and questions within that. So let's start by refreshing by reading the poem. One Art by Elizabeth Bishop. The art of losing isn't hard to master. So many things seem filled with the intent to be lost. Their loss is no disaster. Lose something every day. Accept the fluster of lost door keys, the hour badly spent. The art of losing isn't hard to master. And then practice losing farther, losing faster. Places and names and where it was you meant to travel. None of these will bring disaster. I lost my mother's watch, and look, my last or next to last of 3 loved houses went. The art of losing isn't hard to master. I lost 2 cities, lovely ones. And vaster, some realms I owned, 2 rivers, a continent. I missed them, but it wasn't a disaster. Even losing you, the joking voice, a gesture I love. I shan't have lied. It's evident the art of losing's not too hard to master, though it might look like, write it, like disaster. So let's think about some questions here. Who here is the speaker? Who here is the speaker? Our speaker and poet are 2 different things. So our speaker here is really anyone who has lost. Now, is there overlap between our speaker and our poet? Certainly. The example I gave when we discussed in class was if I wrote a poem about being a grandfather with a farm, and I wrote about how much I loved my grandchildren and my farm, the speaker there would be a grandfather. I am not a grandfather. However, I am the poet. But if you take another example, if I wrote a poem about being a teacher, the speaker there would be any teacher. But so I, as a poet, would also fall into that category. So we could have some overlap between our speaker and our poet. But our speaker here is someone who is lost. Sometimes your speaker is going to be as straightforward as just saying some guy. You'll know who your poet is, or you'll have the author's name. But the speaker is going to be a little more tricky. It's going to be depending on what's there in the text. So here our speaker is someone who's faced a loss. So keep in mind that distinction between speaker and poet. Moving to another distinction, who is the audience? There's a slight difference here between audience and reader. I think your knee-jerk reaction here when I ask audience is going to be, oh, I'm the audience. Well, you're the reader, but not the audience, not the speaker's audience. Even if you don't keep a diary, you're familiar with the concept of a diary. You don't write that diary for everyone to read. You write that diary for you. You are the audience there. The same thing's happening here. Our speaker is her own audience. You are the reader, yes, but our speaker is her own audience. With that in mind, what is the purpose of the poem for the speaker? What's the speaker trying to do here? Pause a moment to come up with an answer on your own before you listen to my answer. Okay. What the speaker's trying to do here is they're trying to convince themselves that losing, it's not too bad. It's okay. Look, it's not that hard. But are they successful? Do they achieve that purpose? So again, I want you to pause and ask yourself, did they achieve that? And coming back, looking at the poem, let's look at the moments in the poem that tell you that, no, I don't think she has achieved it. Even losing you, the joking voice, a gesture I love, she interrupts herself to think on this person that she's lost. You don't have to interrupt yourself when you're fine with something. These moments, these intrusions, interruptions, these paragraphed points, these show you that there is still emotion happening here. Maybe for these first few stanzas, you're able to convince yourself, oh, it's okay, it's okay. But in this last stanza, that's when you see it fall apart. She hasn't convinced herself. She realizes it does look like disaster. When the speaker tries to gloss over the pain, saying, no, it's not disaster, it's not too hard to master, does that make you feel more sympathy for the poet, for the speaker, I mean? Does that make you feel more empathy for the speaker? Or does it make you frustrated with our speaker? Now, I don't have an answer for you for that. That's how you're feeling there. Okay? So that's our questions we discussed in class. I want to ask you to hold a second with yourself. Ask yourself, how are you feeling towards our speaker right now? And now I'm going to take you a step further. I've told you that our speaker and our poet aren't necessarily the same thing. There can be overlap, but they're not the same thing. You have how you feel towards the speaker. And now we're going to look at the poet. So Elizabeth Bishop, if you want to read all this, you can go ahead and pause, but I'm going to skim through the high points. Elizabeth Bishop was born a little over a century ago. Her father died a few years after her birth, and her mother was sent to an insane asylum. Keep in mind, this is the early 1900s. This effectively orphans Elizabeth. So take a moment back. I lost my mother's watch. Now this moment has more meaning. Having lost the mother's watch, that's something emotional. She doesn't have much of her mother's. She lives with her paternal grandparents over in Great Britain. So she started out in the U.S. She's over in Great Britain. She ends up back in the U.S. She goes to college. She's successful as a poet. She's able to live off of the money she makes as a poet. And so she moves to Brazil. She lives in Brazil for a while. And in Brazil, she falls in love with a woman. She finds the love of her life, Miss Loda de Machado Soares. Here she is in love. However, the woman that she loves most passes away due to suicide. That is one of the hardest ways to lose a person. And back in the 1960s, we don't have a whole lot of help for mental health. We don't have a whole lot of help for the recovery here. And so when we look again, when we look at the lost cities, the lost continents, she's been in the U.S., she's been in Britain. Those are two different continents. She's also lost both of those. She ends up in Brazil, and in Brazil she faces the hardest loss of all. She loses that woman that she loved. And so you notice here, you can understand that there is a person behind this joking voice, a gesture I love. And you can see the way she breaks down in this last stanza even more. Even losing you. And now you know who you is, who the you refers to. The joking voice, the gesture I love, there's a face there now. Our chance have lied. It's evident the art of losing is not too hard to master, though it might look like disaster. You understand now why this is a cascading conclusion, the way it all ends in this hurry, this almost a jumble. There's emotion here because there's a person that she specifically lost. And again, that probably confuses for you this distinction between speaker and poet. The poet had a motivation for what she was experiencing. The poet was writing from her personal experience. But the speaker can be anyone who's faced this loss. The speaker is this woman who has faced these losses. And so on one hand, you have Elizabeth Bishop, the speaker, but you also have Elizabeth Bishop, the poet. And that's where it helps, too, to remember this distinction between audience and reader. This was a poet who made her living off of her poems. She knew her reader. But on the other hand, we also have a speaker who's writing to herself where she is her own audience. So you have a little bit of this double happening here that I think you should take some time to wrestle with. Once you've wrestled with that for a little while, and let me know what questions you might have there, I want us to take a moment to look at the structure here. We move from something small, door keys, we've all lost our keys, to something that hopefully none of you have to face for a long, long time, the loss of someone we love. We move from insignificant to most significant. And so when you look back at your assignment, what you'll be doing is you'll be applying this structure sum to your own revision. So you're going to be kind of playing with two different structures here and kind of making them overlap into your own thing. There's a wrestling that's going to happen here. There's another video for you to watch to go over these directions. That's at this link here. But this is going to conclude our video of one art covering what we went over in class Monday the 17th and Tuesday the 18th. Once again, if you have any questions, please email me, okay? Hopefully this gave you some new, fresh perspective on this poem. Hopefully this caused you to wrestle a little more. There's a lot of learning that happens in the wrestling, so I will ask you often this year to wrestle. Here I say,